So, talking about psychopathy and crime, I've said a little bit about psychopathy already. I've given you a basic idea that it's a kind of extreme personality disorder, an extreme antisocial personality disorder. But hopefully you just have a broader idea than that. And, if you've done my forensic psychology course, then we've got in more detail on what psychopathy is. Before I go over the definition in more detail, what do you think are the main characteristics to do with psychopathy? What is it that comes to mind?
They lack emotion.
Okay, a lack of emotion. Yeah. Yeah, John.
Can't tell between right and wrong.
Okay, so no moral compass. Yeah. Anything else?
Manipulation.
Okay, so they can manipulate others, right? Yeah. Yep, a lack of empathy. Good. Anything else?
Yes.
Okay, so kind of narcissistic features, grandiosity, good. What do you think it is that separates it from antisocial personality disorder? If psychopathy is even more extreme, what do you think it is that's actually observable that's different?
I know you just said observable, but like can be hidden, like in successful psychopaths.
Okay, so they're more successful.
Can be.
Okay, okay. Anything else?
I feel like they like kind of know like when to turn it on and off kind of thing. Like
Okay.
they kind of know what they're doing.
Okay, so again, they have this kind of mask.
Yeah.
They can manipulate and so on. When we use the term psychopathy nowadays, really what we're referring to is the definition from Hardy Fleckley's book, The Mask of Sanity. This is what Robert Hare took inspiration from when doing his work on the psychopathy checklist. The psychopathy checklist is still seen as the gold standard for measuring psychopathy. It's still used in prisons and so on here in North America and in the UK. And Robert Hare has probably done the most influential work in modern day psychology in psychopathy. So in the Mask of Sanity book, what Dr. Fleckley highlights is that there is a type of criminal who is morally insane, meaning they have no moral compass, they have no feeling over doing something right or wrong, but they're able to appear sanity. They can put on a mask and they can appear as though they're normal. They can appear as though they do care about other people, they do care about what's right and wrong, but it's all superficial, it's all manipulation. And really what he focuses on also is that it's a disorder of the personality. It's not that this person has a cognitive impairment or that they are mentally ill and that they are technically insane and that they don't know what they're doing, that they don't know what they're doing is wrong. They do know what they're doing is wrong. It's just that it has no emotional impact on them. They're not psychotic. They're not delusional. It's not that they're schizophrenic or seeing hallucinations or anything such as that. It's that they just have no sense when it comes to this is right, so I should do right, versus this is wrong, so I should not do that. And well, it's really this book that gives us that definition clearly. We can see earlier ideas similar to this. The American psychologist Pritchard had this term called moral insanity, which again was to refer to a type of criminal who was not delusional, they weren't cognitively impaired, they were morally insane, okay? Richard Koch had the term psychopathic inferior. What he meant by inferior was a vulnerability to committing crime, okay? And by psychopathic, he was talking about a personality vulnerability, okay? So again, it's not the case that they're mentally ill or delusional or have some cognitive impairment or something such as that. It's a disorder of their personality, okay, that's predisposing them to being more criminal and psychopathic. Now, the original DSM had the term sociopathy, okay, referring to psychopathic characteristics that are a result of not socializing, okay, so that arise through environmental factors. Now, the term sociopathy was pretty popular in criminal psychology in the 1920s, 1930s, okay, but after the first edition, the DSM got rid of it, okay? They replaced it with antisocial personality disorder because there's so much overlap. They're not exactly the same, okay? But if we go by the criterion used for measuring sociopathy in the definition, it's very, very close to antisocial personality disorder. Sociopathy is more like antisocial personality disorder than is psychopathy, okay? And like I say, psychopathy is really more of a extreme disorder. To put that in perspective, 85% of the prison population have an antisocial personality disorder. Only about 20, 25 at most have psychopathy. So the vast majority of those with psychopathy will also meet the definition of antisocial personality disorder, but only a minority of those with antisocial personality disorder will meet the definition of psychopathy, okay? Or in the general public, about 3% of people have an antisocial personality disorder, about 1% have psychopathy. Looking at the difference in regard to whether one has a conscience, so a sense of right and wrong, okay? Psychopaths essentially have no conscience, okay? Sociopaths, or those with antisocial personality disorder, do, but it's weak. But they do have a weak sense of empathy, a weak sense of concern for others, okay? It's psychopathy who have much less regard for other people, though of course there's empathy impairment for both, okay? Now, psychopaths, even though they're overrepresented amongst the forensic population, they're not always violent, okay? Robert Hare has done a lot of work in the business world that psychopaths are overrepresented among CEOs. Basically, if there is a field in which there is the promise of reward and status and dominance, and it can also be to one's advantage to take risks, then there's going to be an attraction there for psychopaths, okay? And certainly a lot of researchers have focused on the lack of empathy being a central feature for psychopathy. Now, if we break empathy down, like we did last time when talking about autism, there's affective empathy, which is about actually feeling something for someone else. And then there's cognitive empathy, which is theory of mind and being able to understand other people's points of views. It's more the affective empathy that's impaired in psychopathy. So if a friend or someone close to them comes to them with good news, they don't feel joy for that person, right? They're not feeling a sense of positivity on someone else's behalf. If they see someone else in pain, a lot of people would, cringe, or that would cause some uncomfortableness for that person themselves, even watching someone else in pain. A psychopath isn't going to have that kind of feeling, that kind of reaction. Now, the psychopathy checklist has 4 factors, okay, that emerge through factor analysis. So psychopathy is not one thing, it's not one characteristic, it's not one trait, it's a collection of characteristics, right? And now all of these characteristics are closely tied together, they all heavily correlate, but still they're somewhat independent in terms of being in 4 separate factors. Now, the psychopathy checklist has 20 different items. They're each measured 0 to 4. Each measured 0 to 2. So there's a total there out of 40, okay? In the prison system, a score of 30 is meaning that you're a psychopath. For research purposes, it's a score of 25. The implications of being diagnosed as a psychopath in the prison system can be pretty harsh. You're more likely to get a death penalty, more likely to get a larger prison sentence, less likely to get parole, and so on. And so because of that, we have to be more careful when calling someone a psychopath, which is why the benchmark is higher. So the 4 factors, first of all, are those to do with interpersonal relationships. So this is where the grandiosity, the narcissism comes in, the superficial charm, the gift of the gab, the pathological lying, manipulating others, conning others. The second factor is this deficient emotion, okay, the fact that they have emotions on a shallow level only, if at all, that they lack remorse, they lack guilt, they are callous in their regard for others, their lack of empathy, and then failure to accept responsibility. The third and fourth factor are also common to those with antisocial personality disorder, okay? If we look at the DSM's criteria for diagnosing antisocial personality disorder, there is a lot of focus on characteristics to do with these last 2 factors, okay? There's much less emphasis on these first 2 factors, okay? So if someone has antisocial personality disorder, they would likely also score high on these latter 2 factors. It's just not the case that they might score as high as psychopaths in these former two factors. So the third factor is to do with impulsivity. We see that also in those with an antisocial personality disorder. They're stimulation seeking. They are willing to live a parasite-like lifestyle, leech off others in order to get what they want, to take advantage of others. They operate on what they want right now, okay? So they don't have realistic long-term goals. They want immediate gratification, okay? They're looking for instant pleasure. And so this makes them impulsive and irresponsible as well. Then the last factor is to do with antisocial behavior. So this is unable to control your behavior, early evidence of a behavioral problem, delinquency across the teenage years, and then a wide range of criminal behaviors as well. Now, the latter factor really does focus on criminal-like behavior, okay? And so that's why this tool, the psychopathy checklist, is good for predicting reoffending rates, right? Which is why it's used in prison and can have a say in parole hearings and in sentencing. Because we've seen that those who score higher in this checklist, they're more likely to reoffend, they're more likely to be violent, they're less likely to be rehabilitated, so they're more likely to keep being a danger to the public. But you might argue that this fourth factor is putting too much importance maybe on criminal behavior, meaning that if we're trying to measure psychopathy in the general public, someone might not score high, even though they're high in the other characteristics, but because they haven't been criminal in some way. So there are many measurements of psychopathy used for the general public that only measure these first three factors, okay? But what we find is when measuring psychopathy in the prison system for the purposes of predicting reoffending, it's also massively advantageous to have this fourth factor. So that's why all four are included in this measurement. Yeah. Any questions on anything there? I want to give you an example of a psychopath who would score highly, and then you can see if you can identify some of the checklist characteristics. So this is David Kruger. In 1957, he was convicted for murdering 3 children in Canada, and he spent nearly 35 years in prison. But in 1991, he was seen by the psychologists in the psychiatric institution he was in as a great example of rehabilitation, okay? That this was someone who had done something murderous, and yet he had been rehabilitated through his time there and was now ready to be a useful member again to society. So to test this, they gave him a day pass. So in 1991, after nearly 35 years of prison, he was given his chance to go to prison for the first time on a day pass, and he decided, I'm going to take this opportunity to kill again. Okay, so when he had been locked up, he had a crush on someone called Dennis Kerr, okay, who was an inmate. But Dennis Kerr had not been interested, okay, had turned away his advances. But David Kruger was not okay with this, okay? He wasn't someone who you turned down. He had to be always on top. No one makes him feel less. So he decided he was going to get revenge and he was going to kill Dennis Kerr on his day out. Now, he wasn't very physically capable himself. He wasn't capable himself of committing the murder. So he decided to track down another former inmate and to talk him into doing the killing for him, okay? And so the 3 of them went out into the woods, and then he convinced his accomplice to murder Dennis Kerr. It was a brutal murder. And then once the murder was finished, David Kruger went straight to the nearest police station, turned himself in, and ratted on the accomplice as well, okay? Now, there isn't a whole lot of interviews with David Kruger, but I have seen a pretty old BBC interview, and there's an extract here in which he's asked about why he did it. So the interviewer says, what was going through your mind at this time? This was someone you loved. According to Kruger, he claims he loved this man. Kruger says, curiosity, actually, and an anger, because he had rebuffed all my advances. I just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. The interviewer is a bit taken back because he already killed 3 children. So she responds, you already killed 3 people. His immediate response is, yes, but that was years and years ago. So I don't know that. If he's this planning and this able to convince someone else to do his dirty work, I would think probably above average. Okay, so just looking at the contents of this and the characteristics of the crime, which of these checklist characteristics do you think are evident? Lack remorse, okay. Obviously, because he got someone else to do the killing for him. Right, okay. Lying about why they're going to the woods, presumably, and so on, yeah.
Impulsivity, probably too.
Because you wanted to know that
Yeah.
feeling of killing again.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I want to say like criminal versatility, just because the difference in like killing 3 children versus killing like something you love. Like
Yeah.
obviously I don't know the reason for the kids, but like that just seems very different.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like grandiose, like he wants to feel superior above everyone else.
Exactly, that was a large motivation behind the killing. Okay. What about some more to do with the second factor? You know, he claims he loves this person. Okay, is that a deep sense of love? Right, obviously not. Okay, so the kind of feelings are obviously very shallow. So, you know, lack of shame, disregard for others' suffering. He persuaded someone else to do the killing. This kind of gift of the gab, okay, glib. You know, he has a very quick and clever comeback to the questioner's response. One of the points on the psychopathy checklist is revoking conditional release, which means you do something that means you won't get parole in the future. And killing someone on your day pass is going to mean you don't get parole in the future. Okay. Obviously shallow affect, and then, you know, grandiosity, wanting to be on top. Okay, I'm going to show you a few short interviews. Okay. Word of warning, they're pretty unsettling. Okay, but these are psychopathic convicted offenders. Okay, they are, you know, the worst of the worst, those with the most extreme form of personality disorder. And what I'd like you to do is, on Canvas, there's the psychopathy checklist. If you open it up and then just mark any of these that you see, okay, as we go through the interviews. So there's 4 interview clips here. I'm only going to play 3. I don't think one gives all that much away, but you know, the link is in the slide, so you can watch the whole thing if you want to afterwards.
Lacking any semblance of emotion or empathy, a psychopath is barely even human. So, from the woman behind the Manson murders, to the boy who killed his younger sister, join us. Hosted by psychologist Anna Salter, the 1996 documentary Truth, Lies and Sex Offenders featured interviews with multiple predators. One in particular, known only as Robert, was both a manipulative child molester and an epitome of psychopathic behaviour. Whilst unlike the others on this list, he didn't murder somebody. The coldness in which he describes the molestation of his stepdaughter is just as chilling.
It started at about the age of 1. When I was the punisher, I was the one who decided punishment over the children. I was the one who spanked the children. I was the one who punished the children. I would tell myself, well, she's not going to be like that. She is going to be the perfect mate. And I told myself that. And I didn't molest her then.
Perfect mate.
The perfect
So you were...
mate. I was grooming her to fit me. Then when I molested her at 18 months old. And I thought to myself, I said, well, this is going to be easy. This is going to be easy. I'm going to have my own child, my own stepdaughter, which is really not blood related to me. And I'm telling myself these things, it's not blood related to me. When she grows up to be 14, 15 years old, I will have the perfect sexual mate for sexual purposes. Anything else didn't matter. It was sex. That was it. I didn't care about, really, honestly, I didn't love the child. I wanted the child for my own purposes, you know, and treating them like a person, but they were just objects. The best way to fool people is to help them, is to ask what they want, ask what they need. Do they need any help doing anything? Do they need any money, or do they need their car fixed? Do they need the grass cut? Do they need their children looked out for? Do they need anything to get them to think that I am a decent person and want to help? Trust me, I will help. And yeah, that was manipulation all the way.
In January 1999, after 8 years of a violent marriage, Mary Jean Pearl finally separated from her abusive husband, John Battaglia. Yet whilst the pair hated one another, Pearl was convinced that he adored their daughters, Faith and Liberty. Still, while she initially let John continue to see them, after he attacked her once more on Christmas, a subsequent 2-year probation sentence meant the visits became periodic. Then in April 2001, Pearl complained that he'd violated his parole once more. As such, Faith and Liberty's next visit would be their last. According to prosecutors, this was the final straw, and an infuriated John decided to murder his daughters, knowing just how much it would devastate Pearl. Of course, unaware of his plan, she left the pair with him for a planned dinner. However, John instead took them back to his apartment. There he suddenly found Pearl, all the while aiming his gun at Liberty and Faith. John then placed the call on speakerphone and told Faith to ask her mother why she wanted Daddy to go to jail. As Pearl listened, obviously fearful and confused, she heard her daughter plead with John to not shoot. Her cries meant little, however, and following their pleading, he shot Faith 3 times and Liberty 5. Nearly 17 years later, John was executed by lethal injection. A year prior to his death, whilst preparing for his first scheduled execution, he was interviewed for the documentary, My Dad's on Death Row.
Oh, when I attacked Michelle, I wouldn't really call it attack. Went up to her as she was walking down the sidewalk, and I said, you're going to have to learn this lesson. And I just held her by the shoulder, and I popped her in the head twice. And, you know, she moved her head the wrong way, and I snapped her nose. And she fell down, and I just walked away. She said I struck her about 20 times, but she was unconscious before she hit the ground. Well, the practice she got me put in prison. She knows that the bullshit she pulled, the only way to keep from sending her front teeth flying out her asshole is to have me behind this glass. Because she's a bitch, and she deserved to have the shit knocked out of her, but you know, what the hell.
And when you think about that incident, how does it make you feel?
Makes me feel like I should have killed her. She's such a pain in the ass. Do I think I was a good father to Liberty and Faith? Yes, I mean, you know, I tried to be. Oh, gosh. My fondest memory of my daughters, well, I have another daughter. She's 30 now, Christy. When we used to all get together and go somewhere, it was a kind of a little bit of a 3-ring circus, if you can imagine. 3 highly energetic, fun little girls just having a great time. Oh, how did Faith and Liberty die? They said they died of gunshot wounds.
So there's nothing about that you remember?
Not particularly, no.
I think it was the police called us and said that they had found him. But he had gone and picked up a girlfriend right after that, and then went next door to a tattoo parlor and had 2 roses in barbed wire tattooed on his arm for Faith and Liberty.
Yeah, the night that I was arrested, I had the roses.
And do they have any significance?
Yeah, I love roses.
The subject of the recent documentary, Psychopath, Paris Bennett brutally murdered his younger sister when he was only 13 years old. Years earlier, on February 4th, 2007, Paris and the 7-year-old Ella were in their Texas home under the care of a babysitter. Somehow, at some point after she was put to bed, he convinced the babysitter to go. Paris then calmly entered Ella's room, and while she slept peacefully, he proceeded to beat, choke, and stab her to death. Disturbingly, later in custody, he confessed to the twisted truth, stating he committed the murder to devastate his mother, Charity. According to his story, he initially planned to kill her, but when he realised that the loss of her children would impose a lifetime of suffering rather than just a few minutes of pain, he instead changed his mind. Still, despite this revelation, Charity continues to visit Paris, comparing his mentality to a shark. No better was this comparison seen than in his recent interview with broadcaster Piers Morgan.
Do you remember what happened after the emergency services turned up at the house?
I remember that a male officer walking past me and into the bedroom, and I remember hearing him mutter, "Oh my God," when he saw what I had done. And I remember, I just felt like I was drowning in shame, knowing that they saw what I had done and knew that I had done it.
Your sister Ella was just a young girl, obviously. What were your feelings towards her as her brother, her older brother?
We could sit here and talk all day about my feelings for my sister. A description of my feelings isn't something that I can give you in the brief time that we have together, because I loved her. I loved her with every fiber of my being. But
You say that in the present tense.
Yes.
I mean, she's dead because you killed her.
Yes.
But you love her.
Yes, I do.
Do you think you understand what love is? I mean, are you capable?
I don't really know how to answer that question. And I'm not saying that to be difficult or stubborn, but it's not simple. So I can't just point at something and say, okay, that's love. I recognize it easily, and I feel that.
Why did you have such anger towards your mother?
I spent a lot of time feeling alone as a child. A lot of time feeling left out, not only by my peers, but also by my own family.
But you had done this specifically in the end.
Yes.
To cause your mother maximum pain. This has achieved your goal, which was to effectively mean your mother lost both her children at once. One to death, one to incarceration. When you saw her completely grief-stricken and in utter torment, that is what you were hoping to achieve by your actions. So I'm just curious whether the reality of what you hoped to achieve lived up to your expectation or hope.
No. At no point did I ever feel like I had accomplished something or that I had achieved a goal. And one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to talk about how I felt at that time is because I'm completely estranged from who I was then. And now I can't comprehend how I could ever have thought that killing my sister would solve my problems. It's like we're here talking about a completely different person. It's like you're asking me to try to climb inside someone else's head and peer through his eyes and catalog his thoughts. And I realize we're talking about myself, but it doesn't feel like we are.
Okay, so we'll talk about the first one. First of all, what's some of the obvious psychopathic characteristics here?
Can you give me a quick rundown of the first one I got? I was so locked on that last one.
The one who was screwing his stepdaughter.
Yeah, the molester.
Oh, yeah.
Shallow effect. Like he said that he like, she was just an object to him.
Right, so he had no regard for her whatsoever. Right. Yeah, no empathy whatsoever, or shame.
Did they say 18 months?
Yeah.
Lying, deception.
Right, and he gave that whole speech about how if you want to, manipulate people, you have to appear like you're
Helping.
and so on. So really talking about that cunning, manipulative nature, right, of the psychopath.
Superficial charm.
Exactly, that too, yeah.
Yeah, he had it though, for sure. I can tell.
Right,
He had me sold, for sure.
on being a psychopath.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Yes,
Like,
right.
just the way he was able to talk about like just messing with people
Right,
for his own gain was like
sure.
super.
And it's not just what they're saying, but how they say it, how
Oh, yeah.
bold they are about it, right?
Yeah,
You can see in their face.
The charisma behind it.
Right.
That's everything. Yeah, that's everything.
Okay, and then the third one, well, the second one that you saw. He claims that he loved his two stepdaughters and that he was a good father to them. Yet he was willing to kill them in order to get back at their mother, who he was angry at for whatever reason. Again, what was some of the characteristics there? Right,
Said failure to accept responsibility.
right.
See, like,
He felt still that like she
Yeah.
deserved it somehow.
and like he said that they said that they got shot. Like he never said that he shot them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my next question. He never confessed it.
Um,
I mean, his answers didn't seem like it.
that certainly suggested as though he wasn't taking responsibility.
Right.
I think that was just the way he chose to word it, and it was more passive.
Yeah.
Somehow that's maybe more comforting for him. Okay, and then maybe the hardest one, because those first two, very clearly, just on the surface of it, just taking them at their word, meet the criteria for psychopathy, right? For the final one, you maybe need to dig a little bit deeper. You can't necessarily go by just what he's saying, right? Because he does claim to have shame and guilt and still love his sister. He claims to have a lot of these emotions and feelings, but how much do you really buy what he's selling? How much do you really believe him?
I don't.
Why
I feel
not?
like he was trying to make himself like feel emotion.
Okay.
Like when he was like, I can't really like say, like he wasn't able to express it. I feel like I felt like he was trying to make himself like cry a little bit or like
Okay.
show emotion.
You think maybe he wants to feel these things?
Yeah, like he was like putting on a persona.
Okay.
And just to like add into that, how he was like, I feel like it's not even the same person. It's like he completely like dissociated like from that
Yeah.
and like was trying to take on like a different persona that like wasn't guilty.
Yeah.
So like I feel like if you're doing that, like it's almost like more reason for people to believe that people are guilty in a sense.
Yeah, he, I don't know, in a very weird way, like I kind of, like I get what he means by like, it's hard for him to like say how he was feeling and thinking at that
Yeah.
time. How long ago from that incident till the end? You have any idea?
Well, he said he was 13, and I'm thinking that's going to be at least 7 years later.
Okay, so yeah, it's not time. So like, yeah, like, so hearing him talk about like how he couldn't really, how it was hard for him to like answer some of the questions, like I feel like I get how like off first like view, you feel like just talking, like, I don't know, the more he kept talking about it, like I could see how like it, it really kind of, for him personally, felt like a whole different person. But like, but you definitely heard of those cases where it was like, well, that wasn't even me, and it's like to a normal sane person, it's like you're crazy, but like in their head, like it really genuinely wasn't them. So I don't know. It was
Yes, yeah.
To me, that came off more so as like a failure to accept responsibility.
Yeah.
Like through dissociating himself from the like person that he was, he's like, that person did that, but I can't even like mentally put myself in that headspace. Like, I don't know really who did that because I'm not
Right.
kind of deal. Like he already admitted to it and he got caught, but like anything to not accept the responsibility and be the person who did that.
Yeah. For the same reason, maybe as to why he's referring to her still in present tense, they still loves her. acting as though she still exists in some realm or some way, even though nobody killed her. Again, maybe that's still lessening his concerns or feelings. Yeah. Did you something else, Abby?
I was just gonna say, like, I feel like when someone is lying so hard, they try to cover all of their tracks before they're even asked a specific question. And I felt like there were some times that I recognized him doing that, like answering like deeper questions than he was being asked, so that he could like cover, like to be more like realistic, but it comes off as more defensive.
Yeah.
Was that his mom?
He was watching, yes. And you could see her getting upset with something. I'm sure. Oh.
I also, I feel like that's, like they said that his mom still visits him like every week.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the reason that he said that his plan didn't work, because his plan was to make his mom lose both children. But I feel like since she's still visiting him every week, she like isn't losing him. And I kind of feel like that's why he was like, oh, didn't work. Like, because he wanted to make his mom feel the most pain possible.
But also his feelings towards his mom has probably changed massively, right? A teenage boy who's 13 often does have some sort of resentment or something towards their mother. Now he's probably early 20s, right? Probably that's all completely changed. And he probably is glad that she's visiting now in his life. I think what's quite clear in those cases is this kind of disconnect, okay, that psychopaths often experience. You know, disconnect with other people, it's hard for them to attach, but also disconnect that they don't really have any regard for other people's feelings, but also often a disconnect between themselves, their minds, and their own body, and what they are actually doing themselves. And I'm going to come back to that point, particularly in more detail. But first, when talking about some causes or risk factors for psychopathy, one that we've already talked about is maternal deprivation, right, in relation to attachment theory. Now, just further on this, we have a study that's doing two research designs. We have a correlational design in which we have over 300 people, all the same age, 28. They're completing two questionnaires, a self-report psychopathy questionnaire, and then a maternal care questionnaire from when they were children, so retrospectively. And then a longitudinal study also, following up on people who did experience maternal deprivation, prolonged separation during that critical period, versus people who didn't, and then reports of psychopathy at age 28. In both designs, we see a significant relationship between maternal deprivation and psychopathy. So a significant negative correlation in the correlational study between maternal care and psychopathy. And then in the longitudinal study, a substantial increase in psychopathy for those who lacked maternal care in their early years versus those who didn't. Right, it's Cohen's d 0.95. It's a very large effect. Okay. So again, this is a point we've already talked about when talking about attachment theory, but we've seen that this maternal deprivation during the critical period especially is one risk factor for developing a more psychopathic personality. Another issue is the disconnect that they experience between their mind and their body. You know, our emotional experiences often sometimes arise directly from our bodily sensations, right? You know, sometimes you know you're anxious, not because of psychological symptoms, but because your throat's going dry or because of a shaking feeling or some other physiological reaction, right, to the situation. Sometimes you know you're sad because you have this kind of pit in your stomach. There's, you know, some physical characteristic that you can point to. And there's a well-known quote by William James: "We feel sad or sorry because we cry. We are angry because we strike. We feel afraid because we tremble." I.e. that, you know, the emotions that we feel often come from recognizing those physiological changes, right? Okay, so we know that psychopaths are lacking emotion. So the question then is why? Perhaps they are inaccurate in their own perceptions of their own bodily states. So the somatic marker hypothesis is that we use somatic markers to make decisions. Somatic markers are bodily sensations that you can clearly tie a feeling or emotion to, okay? So again, this lump in my throat or my throat going dry, that's a somatic marker because I know that's a bodily sensation that I can put down to anxiety that has an emotion tied to it. Again, the pit in my stomach, right, might be tied to sadness. So again, it's a somatic marker. So the somatic marker hypothesis of psychopathy is that these lack in the lack of somatic markers is really then what's causing the psychopathic behavior. Now, we've looked at the fact already that those who have a greater propensity for antisocial behavior typically have lesions in the ventromedial region, right, particularly the prefrontal cortex being damaged. Now, when we look at those who have ventromedial lesions, they don't show typical sweat production to socially disturbing pictures as a typical person does. They perform poorly on decision-making, such as the Iowa gambling task and other executive function tasks that we've looked at. They don't show anticipatory fear, okay, meaning that they don't show sweat production before taking a risky behavior, right, which is a clear somatic marker, right? You shouldn't walk on the ledge of the window outside, right, because you might fall, but that comes with it, physical worry comes with it, genuine fear and anxiety. You shouldn't, drive 120 miles an hour down the road, okay, because that might come with a panic, you might get caught, or some other physical manifestation comes with that. These are all somatic markers, right? If you don't have those somatic markers telling you this is a bad idea, this is a risky behavior, don't go ahead with it, then you're more likely to go ahead with it. And they also are more likely to make bad life decisions, and they're more likely to be psychopathic, more likely to score high on psychopathic measurements. So the question then might be, do psychopaths have deficits in accurate perceptions of these bodily sensations? And that's a question I'm going to come back to directly with a study that tackles it. But just a little bit more on the prefrontal cortex. We know that the prefrontal cortex stores memories of bodily states, okay, getting this information from the somatosensory cortex. So this is where it's pairing, sensations, okay, from the body, okay, with experiences, right? So this experience is what caused this feeling of anxiety, right? And then this pairing is occurring so that when I experience that again, or I see signs of it about to occur, then I get this anticipatory fear, right? So I know that going into this, it's going to cause me a sense of anxiety or fear, so I should avoid it. The orbitofrontal cortex also regulates the autonomic nervous system, okay, which evaluates how much emotional significance you should tie to a stimuli, right? Because the autonomic nervous system, if it's reactive and aroused by a particular stimuli, then you're going to put more emotional impacts on that, okay? It's causing you more arousal, so you're going to tie more emotion to it. And this can all occur consciously or unconsciously, right? Because it all has to occur automatic decision-making, right? You have to be able to detect a stimuli that is going to be threatening, for example, immediately, right, in order to make the best decision, right? You need to be able to pick up on a threatening expression, okay, instantly in order to know how to react. From an evolutionary survival point of view, right? You need to make decisions instantly, right? Is that monkey a friend or foe, right? You need to know that straight away in order to make the informed decision. So this is a study I told you about already. We have the individuals recruited from a temp agency in LA, remember. They reported their crimes and they had their sweat production and heart rates measured when they were unexpectedly told they have to give a presentation. You have to prepare a speech and then present it. And then we measured sweat production and heart rate, and then we found that there was a difference between successful psychopaths and unsuccessful psychopaths, meaning those that got away with their crimes versus those who were convicted for their crimes. Okay, so I told you that study already, remember? What I didn't tell you was that there was also a questionnaire measuring their bodily sensations in this study. So there was a questionnaire asking on a scale of 1 to 5, how much did you experience a lump in your throat when you were told out of nowhere you have to do this speech in front of an audience of strangers? how much did you experience a change in breathing? How much did you experience heart pounding? How much did you experience your hands trembling, your legs turning to jelly? Okay, so they're completing this questionnaire on a scale of 1 to 5. Now, not even taking into account psychopathy, okay, just your general expectation would be that those who had a massive increase in heart rate when doing this speech, who had massive increase in sweat production, they would score high on this questionnaire, right? That would be the general expectation because that's what it's measuring. Okay, that's what it's measuring. It's measuring changes in physiology, right? It's changes in heart rates, changes in sweat production. And you would expect that those who were confident and who didn't experience change in heart rate, who didn't sweat when given this instruction, you would expect them to score low in this questionnaire, right? That would be the general expectation. And so if we just look at the non-psychopaths, first of all, that is what we find, okay? We have a blue group here who scored low on the questionnaire, and then a red group who scored high on the questionnaire. And these are significant differences. The red group did indeed have a significantly higher increased heart rate than the blue group, okay? Which makes sense. They had an increase in heart rate. They reported that they had an increase in heart rate. The blue group who scored low in the questionnaire, significantly less sweat production during the task than the red group who scored high in the questionnaire. Again, makes complete sense, right? They're reporting self-reports of greater anxiety, and they're reporting through objective measures of sweat production and heart rate more anxiety as well. And these are massive differences, right? P-value of less than 0.5, so we're pretty much 100% certain that these are genuine differences between these two groups. But if we look at just the psychopaths, there is no significant difference between those who scored high in the questionnaire versus those who scored low. In fact, the blue group who scored low in the questionnaire had a slightly higher increased heart rate than the red group, but it's minimal, it's non-significant, okay? And there's also no significant difference to speak of in sweat production, okay, between those who scored high in the questionnaire versus those who scored low. So just by looking at these self-reports of physiological changes, it actually tells us nothing about whether there was a genuine physiological change. It doesn't tell us if there was actually a change in heart rate or a change in sweat production. The two don't measure up. There's no association between them. So there is no connection here between their mind and body, or at least it's indicating a disconnect, right? That they weren't really aware of their physiological changes like the non-psychopaths were. Questions?
So it's about like how they reported it, not like if it actually happened. Like the questionnaire specifically, their bodily sensation measure, like they didn't report feeling those things, or they did not feel them at all.
What do you mean?
Okay.
So
like
we have a genuine measure of heart rates, right? They're actually getting
Right.
heart rate measured, and we actually have electrodes measuring their sweat production.
Right.
This is just their self-report of how did you feel? What was your own bodily sensations? And then we're seeing if they match up.
Yes, I understand that part, but like on the graphs.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand like what the graphs represent, like between the connection of heart rate and sweat to like what they reported.
So the blue group is just a group who scored low on the questionnaire, okay? It's not on the axis or anything, it's just that's the group. And then the red group scored high on the questionnaire. And then the x-axis is just heart rate.
Okay.
And the x-axis there is sweat production.
So it's, okay, I think I was like overcomplicating.
Anything else? Okay, so we have maternal deprivation, we have a disconnect between mind and body. Now, there are also temperament traits that we've talked about already that are early signs of psychopathy. In one longitudinal study, we measure temperament in 3-year-old children, and then we follow up 25 years later at age 28 to measure psychopathy. And in this longitudinal study, we see that fearlessness, stimulation seeking, and disinhibition all predict psychopathy 25 years later. And they're all moderate predictions, okay, moderate effects, okay. Now, putting this into perspective, you know, there are some children who, by their temperament, are naturally more fearless, stimulation-seeking, hyperactive, and those children will be more difficult to socialize, okay? It's not the case, as I'll show you later in the slides, that they're destined to be psychopaths or that they're destined, you know, to be criminals, but obviously that they're at an increased risk, okay, because of it being harder to socialize them than a typical child. So we have, you know, early signs here, even at age 3, okay, of personality, of temperament, okay, that predispose one to being more likely to be psychopathic. I will play this video at the end if there's time, okay? And then parts of the brain. Now, the striatum is a part of the brain I haven't mentioned so far in the course, okay, because its findings are really in relation to psychopathy. But Andrea Glenn in Alabama found that psychopaths had a striatum that on average was 9.6% larger than non-psychopaths. Now, why she had this idea is because the striatum is involved in stimulation-seeking approach behavior. It's also associated with higher extroversion, okay? It's the part of the brain that's involved in the reward circuits, okay? When you see something that you want, you're encouraged to go after it because you're responding to incentive rewards. There's dopamine kicks that are encouraging you to continue pursuing what it is that you're pursuing, responding positively to these incentive rewards. And the striatum is influential in all of that. So we have evidence here that the striatum is structurally different. It's larger in psychopaths. And at the same time, Buckholtz at Harvard was investigating the same part of the brain in relation to psychopaths, but looking at the function of it rather than the structure, okay? So was it more active rather than was it larger? And indeed, it was. It was more hypersensitive in response to incentive rewards, okay? It was becoming even more active in the psychopaths than the non-psychopaths. Now, these two researchers have got here independently, each not knowing of the other one doing their research. So we have more confidence, right, that this is a genuine part of the brain associated with psychopathy because it's two independent sources of information, right? If you hear something and see it, it's more likely to be real rather than just relying upon one sense. And then in 2020, Choi and Rain tried to replicate Glenn's study with a different sample and almost exact same results. In the psychopaths, the striatum was 9.4% larger than the non-psychopaths, okay? So the striatum appears to be one part of the brain heavily tied to psychopathy. Another part of the brain heavily tied is the amygdala. Now, we've spoken about the amygdala a lot already throughout the course, okay? It's involved in fear conditioning, okay? I've told you about this study already, that when comparing the amygdala to psychopaths versus non-psychopaths, it was 18% smaller in the psychopaths than the non-psychopaths. And then this finding was replicated by several researchers, right? All again finding about 18% difference between the two groups. We have also looked at proxies for amygdala functioning. So we looked at the fact that even at age 3 in the Mauritius study, if we measured fear conditioning, those who didn't fear condition were more likely to be criminal, okay, 20 years later than those who conditioned appropriately or typically, right? Now, what we concluded there was that those who didn't fear condition likely had some impairment with the amygdala, but it's a deduction. There's nothing directly measuring amygdala volume or activity, okay? It's a deduction because the amygdala is so crucial to fear conditioning, and these children did not fear condition as typical and were more likely to be criminal. Now, in a study not yet published but by Rain, we have children who are controls, who are typical levels in their personality, and then we have those who score above average in callous, unemotional traits, the early signs of psychopathy, okay? And on average, about 8% difference in amygdala volume, okay, meaning that the amygdala was about 8% smaller in the more callous, unemotional children. Now, this will be an interesting study to follow up on across the years, okay, because we don't have a longitudinal study like this yet with amygdala volume, okay? So it will be interesting to see in, for example, 20 years following up these children, if those with the smaller amygdalas were more likely to be psychopathic or criminal 20 years later or somewhere down the line.
more of like a, or, so like if we use this study on a test, would we just write in press?
Yeah, that's right. And then another study by Rain from China. We have a group of controls, a group of non-criminal schizophrenics, and then a group of convicted murderers, and then a group of convicted murderers with schizophrenia. Okay, those convicted murderers have an amygdala about 9% smaller on average, okay, than the controls. So the schizophrenic murderers, no significant difference, okay? More likely that they committed their crimes out of some delusion rather than psychopathic personality traits. Of course, not all of the murderers are going to be psychopathic, right? Probably if we looked at just the psychopathic ones, the difference would be larger, right? But there's going to be more psychopaths within this group than the other groups, okay? Which is then why there's even still some significant difference in amygdala volume. So putting all of this together, what you know about the amygdala over what I've told you so far across the course, and what I've told you here about the striatum, it might be the case that psychopathy is because of a issue with balance, right? They are very low on punishment sensitivity, right? They're low in anxiety, they're fearless, right? They're low in neuroticism, okay? Their amygdala is smaller, they don't fear condition, the amygdala is less active, okay? All of that means that there's no brakes on the car, right? There's nothing really to stop them, okay, when they're all go ahead, okay? There's nothing really to inhibit them. And then they're also very stimulation seeking, reward seeking. The striatum is larger, it's more hypersensitive to rewards. So they're more pleasure seeking, reward seeking, wanting that immediate gratification, right? So what all this suggests maybe is that, you know, their foot is full down on the accelerator, right, with no brake, and it's all an issue of balance, being tilted far more towards seeking pleasure and stimulation and rewards, as not really having any sense of inhibition or fear or anxiety. Just as a quick reminder, we've also looked at cavern septum pellucidum. That was more likely to be the case in the psychopaths than non-psychopaths. Remember, cavern septum pellucidum arises when the limbic system doesn't develop, typically, where the amygdala resides, and so this is likely all interconnected. And then across the course, right, I've given you a wide range of possible causes of psychopathy. We've looked at, you know, the role of genetics. This might be a predisposition for fearlessness or some other temperament characteristic. We looked at evolutionary reasons, right, that it might be advantageous for a strategy for getting resources to take advantage of others. It's only successful so long as you're the minority, and psychopaths are the minority, then they can take advantage of the more, you know, reciprocal altruists who are the majority of society. Maternal deprivation, okay, prolonged separation during this critical period. We're not saying the environment isn't important. Of course, if you're raised by a psychopath, okay, and that's who you learn from, likely to be more psychopathic yourself. Stimulation seeking, low levels of arousal, lack of classical conditioning, lack of fear conditioning, lack of anticipatory fear, therefore, and then cavern septum pellucidum as well. And then also issues with hormones, right? Lower levels of cortisol in psychopathic convicted offenders, and higher testosterone, lower cortisol ratio than average, okay, also predicts psychopathy. So we have a wide range of possible causes here that we've looked at so far, right, for psychopathy. Now, I lastly want to mention the role of emotional intelligence. What do you know about emotional intelligence? What is it?
Like what keeps you in touch with your emotions, like being able to understand others and also share your own.
Okay, yeah, John.
I think emotional intelligence is that thing that prevents you from, you know, saying like, did your friend just die, knowing like they're crying in front of you, you see them crying, so like it's obviously not wise to be so like upfront about it, but you know, like
yeah. So knowing their emotions, then taking that into account when you're making decisions and behaviors. Yeah. So yeah, so you can monitor and label your own emotions as well as the emotions in others, and then you use that as a guide for your behavior, for making decisions. So for example, a question measuring emotional intelligence might be, George was sad, and an hour later he felt guilty. What happened in between? Which is the most logical answer? A, George accompanied a neighbor to a medical appointment to help out the neighbor. Or B, George lacked the energy to call his mother and missed calling her on her birthday. Don't all shout out at once. So it should be pretty obvious, okay, I hope, right? For most people, it's pretty obvious which one seems the most logical, which one suits. But what we find is that psychopaths do score significantly lower in emotional intelligence than non-psychopaths, which is unlike IQ, okay? There's no significant difference between psychopaths and non-psychopaths in the general public. If we look only at criminals, then psychopathic criminals do score significantly higher in IQ than non-psychopathic criminals. Okay, it's not a moderate difference. Okay, but that's not true in the general public. Now, interestingly, in one study, not only were psychopaths lower in emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence somewhat mediated the relationship between the lack of arousal that we've talked about and psychopathic characteristics. So we looked at the fact that, you know, if you don't sweat as much when you see something that should be frightening, and if you don't have increased heart rate in response to something that should be frightening, then that predisposes you to being more likely to be psychopathic. But what the study has found, that emotional intelligence is mediating this. So if you're not experiencing increase in heart rate, okay, in response to something that should be frightening or something that should be upsetting, then your emotional intelligence is likely to be lower, okay? Maybe because you're not as likely to tie experiences to emotions or deal with the typical feelings that come with, you know, experiencing socially uncomfortable situations. And it's this that's explaining at least some of the relationship, okay, about, well, 28 to 36% of the relationship. So what that means is, you know, if you have some of these predispositions, this lack of arousal, but if you still have emotional intelligence, maybe because you have, you know, family members who still teach you why it's important to consider other people's feelings, or maybe help you in some way, even though it might take more effort to identify other people's emotions and so on, that will lessen the chances, okay, that this will lead to psychopathic behavior, okay? Questions on anything I've covered today? Okay, I can play the video, we'll be half a minute over time. Is that okay?
We take you inside the mind of one of the most evil men in America. He's a notorious and admitted serial killer. And in the last 48 hours, his story has come to a dramatic conclusion. We got a rare and chilling interview with him for our series, Crime and Punishment.
The first time I killed somebody, and it was such a rush.
Tommy Lynn Sells, one of the most infamous serial killers in modern history. A man who says he belongs on death row.
I was raised to do time. I wasn't raised to live out there in that world.
Sells was convicted of killing 13-year-old Katie Harris, stabbing her to death in her bedroom.
I like to use a knife. A gun is too violent, too noisy, but just fit my hand well.
And later, he admitted to killing dozens more. So many, he says he can't even keep track.
I'm not Billy the Kid making notches on my holster, so I know it's been a lot.
Addicted to killing is the way he characterized it.
I don't have an on and off switch. I'm just after that drug. I'm after that feeling.
Nightline interviewed Sells on death row in 2010, one of the rare glimpses into the mind of a serial killer.
It's complicated. When When people enter my life, they get hurt.
Sells is directly linked to over a dozen murders. The drifter's vagrant lifestyle helped him elude police for nearly 15 years as victims turned up from coast to coast.
When you look at me, you know what hate is, because I don't know what love is. Two words I don't like to use is love and sorry, because I'm about hate.
His methods for killing were as random as the people he targeted. He raped many before cutting their throats or beating them. Stabbing others, he strangled some.
A lot of jerking, a lot of movement. It's a physical, you become part of it.
And described it all with seeming detachment from the horrors he caused.
I don't have no feelings, no more, no emotion, no.
And no remorse.
And I like to watch the eyes fade, the pupil fade. It's just like setting their soul free.
We asked Sells what would happen if we said something that angered him.
If we was in a fight and, you know, get your head down in the concrete, then, you know, so be it. But, well, what do you think happened? It cracks like a coconut.
So how did he become this monster? Sells blames much of his murderous rage on sexual abuse he says he suffered as a child.
I think every time I killed that guy that molested me all them years. I seen that in my mind over and over.
Yet children were among his victims.
I didn't want them to live through the pain I lived through.
I tried to get in this door right here.
It was Katie Harris's murder that finally ended his killing spree. 2 days later, Tommy Lynn Sells walked police through the crime scene.
And I opened the window all the way up, well, about like this, and I climbed in.
We kind of stayed up a little later, and we got in a little fight about where we were all going to sleep. We laid there and talked a bit. We talked about the time, like Britney Spears and NSYNC.
Crystal Searles, 10 years old at the time, is one of his few survivors. She was sleeping over at Katie's house that night. More than a decade later, it's all still fresh in her memory.
I woke up startled a little bit and out of nowhere, and I was kind of confused to a loud noise.
I woke this girl up.
Her friend Katie was asleep on the bottom bunk.
I cut her bra.
And I could see that there was this scary older man that I'd never seen before.
I stabbed her here. And then she like jumped back, and then I cut her like this right here.
And he had a hand on her mouth and the knife on her neck, and she's looking at me, and he just cut her throat, and she fell to the ground.
And she fell down right here.
13-year-old Katie Harris lay dying on the floor.
He was about to shut off the light, and he looked one last time, and he noticed that I was there. And he didn't hesitate at all. I mean, just shut the door, came right back towards me with the knife.
And I walked over here, and I went like this.
The only thing that he said is, move your hands, because I had him up here, and he reached over the top bunk and cut my neck.
Sells sliced Crystal's neck, severing her windpipe and grazing her carotid artery.
I am very sure he thought he killed me.
Crystal Searles identified Tommy Lynn Sells as the assailant.
To be honest, he seemed blank. I mean, there was no emotion.
Psychopaths are individuals who lack conscience, they lack remorse, they lack guilt. That's one of the reasons why they terrorize society so much.
Experts like Dr. Adrian Rains say Sells offers a textbook example of the mind of a serial killer. He's been studying how and why the adorable little boys pictured here turned into brutal killers. Could it have been the makeup of their brains?
It's biology coming together with environmental insults which raise the odds of an individual becoming a violent criminal offender.
Recent research suggests that psychopathy may actually be evident in the brain, and that a simple brain scan could reveal key differences in the minds of serial killers.
It's only recently, with the advent of molecular genetics and brain imaging techniques, that we've been able to peer into the minds of murderers really for the first time.
But for some of the families of his victims, ending that brain function was what was important. Sells was on death row for more than 13 years, The most recent delay? Over the exact makeup of the drug cocktail that would be used to kill him. Sells said the pain of the death penalty paled in comparison to his life.
I suffer more here than I'll ever suffer in that grave. I have to live with it every day now. When they kill me, at least I'll be free then.
Last night, Tommy Lindsell's final appeal was rejected. He was executed at 6:27 p.m.
When asked if he wanted to make a last statement, he just simply answered no.
For the family of Katie Harris, it was long overdue.
Now it's a day of closure and celebration that justice has been served.